Every 3 years during Cycle B of the lectionary readings for Sunday Mass, we take a break from the Gospel according to St. Mark and spend 5 consecutive Sundays listening to, considering, and contemplating the 6th chapter of the Gospel according to St. John. The Gospel that began today with the feeding of the 5,000 and will continue with the teaching of Jesus Christ on the meaning and the reality of his presence in the Holy Eucharist. But what I have prepared today is not so much a homily, but rather to set the stage for the next 4 weeks, because you don't want to spend everything that could be said in one day. The church has given us 5 weeks. And so that's precisely what we're going to do. And just kind of look at a few things with regards to broad brushstrokes so that we can listen attentively to what Jesus Christ is going to teach and instruct the crowds. And so during these next several weeks, I would encourage you to take up that 6th chapter of the Gospel according to St. John and read it and reread it. And before every reading, to do what we should do before we read any of the sacred scriptures, and that is to, of course, invoke the Holy Ghost and ask Jesus to open the ears of your heart so that you can hear the sound of his voice speaking to you as he instructs and corrects our way of thinking, especially with regards to the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. So let's begin setting the stage. We notice that there's a great difference between the Gospel according to St. John and the 3 synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And we see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they do narrate the feeding of the multitudes, but what they do not narrate is the discourse of Jesus Christ that follows upon that feeding. But yet, St. John does. And it would kind of beg the question, why would that be the case? Well, it would tie into another question we could ask about the Gospels. Because we know from the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that as they narrate what took place at the Last Supper, they include the institution of the Holy Eucharist. But St. John does not. Curious, isn't it? Curious. But what St. John does do is tell us about the washing of the feet that the synoptics omit. And then he gives us the very lengthy prayer of Jesus Christ to his Father in heaven as our eternal and high priest. So what's going on? Well, it all has to do with St. John's use of the word sign in his gospel. In fact, in his gospel, he narrates 7 specific signs. Now, to kind of understand what he means by his use of the word sign, we need to contrast it from what we commonly understand to be miracles. We talk about the miracles of Jesus Christ. We talk about his authority over unclean spirits. And we kind of leave it at that. But see, St. John sees something much, much more significant going on. So much so, he identifies the works of Jesus Christ as a sign, and he identifies 7 that he has chosen very, very carefully. Why? Well, a sign, strictly speaking, is a visible reality that points to reality that is invisible, that is hidden from our sight. And so, the most common example that's ever, given to help people wrap their mind around what is a sign is to say, like, well, as you would have seen yesterday, there was a little smoke wafting up from the Mission Mountains. Well, what does that signify? You see something visible, but it's pointing to something you can't see. And what can't be seen? Well, it's the fire. But the smoke is there. You don't need any more evidence, right? That's how a sign, more or less, functions. Certainly, sign comes and plays its part very significantly in Catholic, sacramental, theology. Because as you all know from your Baltimore catechisms growing up, you were asked, what is a sacrament? And what was the answer that you were prepared to give? Well, a sacrament is a sign instituted by Christ to give grace and confers the grace it signifies. So a great example, of course, is holy baptism. Water is the sign, and as it washes the body, signifies the interior cleansing of a person's soul, making them to be a new creation. And so you see, St. John is not simply going to pass over the feeding of the 5,000 without exploring its significance. But however, what we're going to get in the following 4 Sundays are not the commentary of St. John of what he thought took place, but rather what Jesus Christ actually said after he worked the sign of feeding the 5,000. Now, for Roman Catholics, this does not take a whole lot of imagination when we look at what Jesus Christ was doing when he was feeding the 5,000. We would recognize it immediately and readily. It would connect with our experience of the celebration of the Sunday Eucharist. So there's Jesus, and the crowd comes to him. The crowd comes to him. And when he sees them, he asks that they recline. Isn't it kind of nifty how St. John includes this little detail? Now there was a bunch of grass in the area. I don't know about you, but doesn't that forcibly remind you of the opening verses of the 23rd Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I shall want. Fresh and green are the pastures where he gives me repose. My sheep know me. They recognize my voice. Therefore, they follow me. Jesus Christ crossed the lake, and the people followed. And when they came to him, he had them recline on grass. What takes place next is where we begin to really connect. We see a very faint, but it's still there, a very faint form of the offertory procession. Where are we going to get food to feed all these people? He asked Philip. My goodness, 200 days' wages isn't enough, even to give people a morsel. But then Andrew chimes in. Here's a boy. He's got 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What does Jesus Christ say? Bring them. Bring them to me. And so the paltry gifts of 5 loaves and 2 fish are brought to Christ at his command. And what does he do with the 5 loaves? He takes them. So he receives what is offered and then proceeds to give thanks. And after having given thanks, he distributes them to the crowd. After they have all been fed and satiated by what they have been given by Jesus Christ, he orders that all the fragments be gathered up so that nothing is wasted. Why do we have tabernacles in churches? If the Eucharist were just symbolic, if it was just a reenactment of what took place at the Last Supper and nothing more, then what would be the point? Could you not simply discard what is left over? Couldn't you just discard it? Well, absolutely not. That's why all that is left over is gathered and placed in one vessel and reserved in a place of honor in the church where the Holy Eucharist is celebrated. Now, because I'm always prepared for a naysayer somewhere, none of you are naysayers though, because you're intentionally here on your vacations to attend Sunday Mass. But let's go all the way back for that hypothetical naysayer who's out there. And we go back to the 2nd century, the early 2nd century, to the testimony of St. Justin Martyr, who gives a very beautiful outline of the celebration of the Eucharist by the early Christians. And he describes the offertory and the prayer of thanksgiving and the communion of the faithful, but also makes specific reference to gathering up what has been left over so that it might be reserved. And reserved for what? Well, for the same reason it's reserved now. I will admit, adoration did come at a later time. But the specific purpose was so that communion could be brought to those who were sick and infirm. And that's what we still do to this day. So that people who are homebound or in our care centers, even though they're not able to come and participate in the Eucharistic sacrifice of Christ, nonetheless can be united with him in Holy Communion in their illness. Christ who wants to be so close to them, to be their strength, their comfort, their consolation. But yes, strictly speaking, as the church is reserving the Holy Eucharist, because of our knowledge of what the Holy Eucharist is, who it is, yes, then adoration began to blossom out of that custom. But anyway, let's continue along. That's kind of the stage of what St. John is setting for us today. To kind of look at these things, just to see what it is that St. John is doing, so that we might be prepared to contemplate the teaching of Jesus Christ that's going to immediately fall after this feeding. But here is the other thing that we need to pay very close attention to. The sign itself was not lost on the crowds, was it? It was not lost on the crowds at all. You know, you can think of ancient people as being obtuse. I mean, we tend to think we're so much the smarter than people in the ancient world. But I think I can reasonably guarantee you that people in the ancient world were much, much more attentive and observant. and superior to us in that regard than we are today. Because they're not distracted by so many devices and noise. And what they saw was something spectacular. And what was it that they saw? Well, St. John gives us a hint. When Jesus went up the mountain and the people came to him and he had them recline, St. John takes pains to note when in the calendar year this feeding took place. The Passover was near. Name a Jew in the ancient world that wouldn't know the date of the Passover. Right? They all knew. But now let's backtrack. What did the people see? What did they see? Jesus crossed the lake. Who was the first to cross a body of water and lead people to the base of a mountain upon which he ascended? Jesus Christ fed 5,000 at that place. But who was the first to feed the multitude of the Israelites with manna from heaven? Do you begin to see what the people are seeing? Now, granted, to be fair, we're at a disadvantage. We're not ancient Jews, thoroughly schooled in the Torah, that are actually living and practicing the Jewish faith. And so some of these things are going to be lost. That's why we need homilies to explain these things. But it was not lost on them. They saw and recognized who it was they were in the presence of and what it is that he had just done for them. But you know, Jesus, knowing people's intentions, he fled the place. He went further up the mountain to find a place of solitude so he could be in communion with his Father. Why? Because the people wanted to seize him and carry him off and make him king. No, I'm not going to resist saying something naughty right now. But you notice, even these folks, they see someone who feeds them and they want to make him king. Doesn't that, again, forcibly remind you of it's the economy, stupid, and how we vote? How often do we vote with our stomachs and not with our heads? This year, we need our head more than our stomach. That's my naughty little commentary for this Sunday morning. But nonetheless, Jesus is going to return, and he's going to explain, yes, they were not incorrect what they saw. What they saw was accurate, and what they recognized was true. But it goes so much more deeper than that. And so these next 4 weeks, as I said, go back to that gospel and read and reread. And let's enter into, this conversation, this exploration, asking God for the grace to renew our faith in the Holy Eucharist, to renew our faith. Because it's in the Holy Eucharist is all. It's our life. It's our hope.